Before we get... Oh, thank you very much, whoever that was telling us it's being recorded. Before we get started from the projects, I'm going to ask Annie Raw from the DFE team to say a few words about reducing bureaucracy and how this is a really relevant topic for the innovation programme as a whole.
Hello everybody, great to be here today. I just wanted to say a few words, but I think the most interesting bit will be when we get to the projects and hearing how it's happening in real life. But just to give some sort of background comments and introduction, the theme for today around reducing bureaucracy has really come from the projects when people were pitching their proposals, at evaluation meetings that we have with all the projects and evaluation teams. It was raised at the learning day that we had with all the projects, and I know that some of the projects have met independently to talk about it and their parallels between their projects. And so we really wanted to take an opportunity to facilitate a session on this and focus on this topic to support learning across the innovation programme but also beyond. So there might be people who aren't at the moment on a project that are joining today, and so we wanted to share our learning with you guys too. And I think that this theme so often comes up with projects is because the changes that you're trying to make to practice, unless it's also thought in parallel about how changes need to happen to your process to support them, then any change in practice you see wouldn't be sustainable long term. And so that's why either reducing or changing bureaucracy in some way is so important to you. It helps you sell the new world to your staff, so that, you know, if you're asking them to do something differently, that you can create that time for them to make that change. And so that's why it just all the time comes up as a topic. And I think for the department, we totally support that. You know, there was always going to be a need for some bureaucracy. It has an important role around records and accountability, but we totally agree and support that more can be done around reducing it, and want to learn from projects on what they're doing around this through the innovation programme. And I think today when we move into the project session, we'll hear a few different things, but there's some interesting themes that are coming through from the projects. Some projects are looking at different ways of recording information, so how can the process support a different way of practice, so through questioning to support a different style of conversation. Also, some projects are looking at how they capture information and recording records to support that change in practice and doing that in a different way. And we'll hear from MLA and Tribar, and that might come through in what they talk about today. There's also a sort of second way people are looking at it there's additional support. So several of the projects have administrative support that they're bringing on board to reduce the burden on social workers. And this can take two forms. One, in the form of administrative support, and MLA and Islington might talk more about that today. But also there are some projects that are really looking at the role of social workers and how what they statutorily need to do, but then also other professionals, what they can do. So looking at work traditionally done by social workers, but that other professionals could do to free up social workers to do what they need to do. And I don't know if people are on the line, but Islington and Catch-22 and Sefton have been doing some work around there. And Mike is Sefton's coach, so he might be able to pitch in at that point. And then the fourth way that we're seeing people looking at trying to do things differently and reducing bureaucracy is through information sharing. So there are a range of projects that are doing bringing multidisciplinary teams, and so how they share work and how they bring together those electronic systems is aimed at trying to reduce the bureaucracy and helping that work together more easily. And so we might hear more about that today. But I think from all of them, what we're really interested to hear from at the department is what change you're making in your systems and processes to support the change in practice that you're trying to do, rather than allowing the process and systems to drive your practice. So yeah, really interested to see how individual examples of change in practice, but then taking it one step further and like why you are doing that, to see the changes in practice that you're trying to achieve.
Okay, thanks very much, Annie. I'd like to now move on to our first bit of project input. I was going to go to Triborough first, but I'm not sure if Julie is on the line. We can't see her number on here. Julie, if you're there, what I might do is unmute everyone. And Julie, if you're there, can you make yourself... So Julie, are you on the line? No? Okay, it looks like Julie's not here. So in that case, what we will do is move straight on to Islington, if that's okay. And Sarah, if you're on the line, we will now unmute you and you can go ahead and speak.
Okay, hi. Am
Hi,
I
Sarah,
on?
thanks.
Okay, so can everyone hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, I suppose I'll just give you a really brief overview of our project, just because I know that not everyone's going to be familiar with what we're doing. We've gone for a whole system change approach, and we've developed a knowledge-based motivational social work that's built on an MI approach to social work, basically. Our theory of change is that if we have skilled social workers working on under an evidence-based model, providing more intensive goal-based change work, then it's our theory that we'll achieve better outcomes and reduce risk and the care population. So we're working in partnership with University of Bedfordshire around building a model of measuring what matters. So we're really trying to move away from that bean counting kind of approach to actually think about what's more purposeful and meaningful social work and how that can contribute to better outcomes. There's a lot of different elements to our project that I probably don't need to go into in too much depth, but we've been putting a lot of thought into reducing bureaucracy, and probably the two key elements for that are around administrative support. So we've employed team coordinators, one for each DTM group. So that's one team coordinator per 5 social workers, to really sort of reduce the burden on social workers. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So it's about sort of freeing up the social worker's mind, freeing up their time, and there's also a financial benefit in doing that as well, because you're paying about 38% less for each task that the team coordinator does as well. So that's a really important part of it. And the other side of things is around our IT system. So we've done a heap of work around streamlining the forms that social workers fill out, because what we found when we did a statistical analysis and a data analysis, we found that there was quite a lot of replication. We didn't feel that the forms necessarily lent themselves very well to actually reading a file as well. We felt that it produced a very fragmented picture of what was going on for the child. So when we redesigned our IT system, we've really gone for a very streamlined model that has a couple of elements. So one of the elements is, I'm not sure how much you know about motivational interviewing, but it's really embedded in language. So our language really shapes the way that we build our relationships with families and the way that we sort of interact together. And we applied that same principle to redesigning our forms. So we really wanted our forms to ask the right questions. And so there's been a lot of work done on just the language that we've been, in the way that we've restructured things. But we also have tried to produce multifunction forms as well. So our child and family assessment report is going to replace about 8 different forms, including the child in need report, child protection report, review conference reports, referrals to our resources panel, request for becoming looked after. So a whole range of different reports. And we've managed to achieve that by producing these dynamic forms. So we use Liquid Logic, which has some really interesting capabilities that enable you to kind of shape the form. How do I explain it? You can do little add-ons. So say you want to turn it into a referral, you'll click a little box and you just have to add a few other bits of information. But essentially what we've really sort of aimed for is a very streamlined approach. So the Child and Family Assessment Report is basically the core document that travels with the child throughout the entire intervention. And we've modelled that to look very, very similar to the National Social Work Evidence Template. And the social workers, when we did the consultation, actually really liked that because it helped them to think in a more evidence-based way, as well as help them to build their chronology as they went, so they could think about threshold a lot more. So that was actually a really popular move that we've made. And the other core document is the Family Goals Form. So our theory of change and our knowledge base really comes from a goal-based intervention approach. So our Family Goals Form replaces all of our plans, so child protection, child in need, PLO, that sort of thing. And really sort of focus in the social worker on the goals for change. Yeah, so that's basically it in a nutshell. I'm not sure how much detail you want me to go into.
That's really, really helpful, thank you. Just to remind everybody on the line, if you'd like to ask any questions, you can do that on the conversation box. Here we go, had one come in as I said that. So, how do you go about working out what the priority information and processes are that inform or support practice?
Okay. So there was 2 stages we went through for that. So first of all, our theory of change, so our knowledge base, so it had to be goal focused. So everything was built around how do we, so the overall goals for the intervention and thinking about what needs to change with this family for us to close the case and sort of working backwards from that. But the other side of things was actually a bit more labour intensive and probably incredibly dull for most people. And that was a process where me and my team got together and went over all of our forms and pulled out all of the data that we currently collect. Look at what was replicated, look at what was the same thing called by different names, and basically streamline the forms to just really, really scale them back and streamline it quite a bit. So there's an element of theory and there's an element of just hard labour.
Thank you. It's a very useful answer to that question. There's a little bit of background noise. Sounded like a horse galloping somewhere. I'm not sure and where that came from. So sorry about that. And Vicky, who wrote in that question, has just said thank you very much. So that's really helpful. We may come back to you, Sarah, if that's okay. But what I'd like to do now is move on. I'm pretty sure that Julie is on the line. Julie, can you say something if you're there?
Okay, I'm here.
Oh, great. Excellent. Good news. Okay, in that case, we will move on to Julie and Triborough, and off you go.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that was a bit of a false start, and it might have been me making the galloping noises because I think I was trying to email to say, I'm here. Anyway, my name's Julie Rook, and I'm the project manager in the Triborough, which is Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea, and Hammersmith and Fulham. And our innovation project is called Focus on Practice, which is quite a wide-ranging program that involves a pretty significant skills development program. So all of our practitioners in all 3 organizations are undertaking systemic training as well as training in motivational interviewing and signs of safety. We're also, we've created some new posts which with the aim of trying to keep social workers in practice, but while they're able to kind of move to more senior roles. And we've got a coaching program, aimed at trying to embed some of the practice changes that we're trying to make. For this purpose, I have kind of narrowed in on something very specific, which we have some experience with, which is somewhat flowing actually from what we've just heard, but we've also made some changes to our recording practice, so not to the system itself quite yet. And that is that we are using a case summary record to record intervention with families. So moving away from event recording, which is generally speaking, I think what most practitioners have been used to. So going out on a visit, coming back, writing everything down. Bit more about doing those recordings at intervals, which are agreed upon between the practitioner and the manager. So it's not the case that we necessarily don't write everything down, but that there's a decision made about how often it's important to capture what's been happening, and using that case summary as a way both of recording and having a record of what those interventions have been, as well as what the perspective of the family and the children are, but also as a method of trying to embed some of what the practitioners are learning on the training, which is really that idea of being much more thinking much less about one moment to the next, and thinking a little bit more about the trajectory of what it is that they're doing, and understanding how what they're doing is relating to what's happening for the family and for the children. So for some of you, I'm hoping that you might be able to see the case summary, because I know Mike has probably been able to send that out. If not, I'm really happy for people to have that afterwards. But basically what it is, for those who can't see it, is we've developed a bit of a form, and actually we're still working on it because I think there's still too much information on this, but it sort of says, okay, in this period of time, what are the different types of interactions that you've had with that family? What was the purpose of that work? And what does that tell us about how far along we are in the goal of what it is that we're doing with this family? And then there's some sections to include things about perspective of the family and the child. What's been interesting about rolling this out is I think it's a real lesson, or a real reminder, that actually changing a form or changing a format it isn't sufficient to change behavior or to change people's approach to these. So what we found is, some of what we found is that people anxious not to let go of that idea of recording every day are using this and in some ways sort of subverting it a little bit, so using it to cut and paste while they're still recording everything into this, feeling like it's another requirement on them. And so I think there are a couple of things that we've done that I think are really important for kind of learning. One is giving permission to people at a very high level. So we did lots of directors' briefings about this, giving people permission to implement this change, but also realizing again that actually what we kind of know already, which is we don't want the form to drive the practice, but equally we can't expect a change in a form to drive a change in practice, and that's something that we're that we're certainly experiencing now. So that's just a really whistle-stop tour through one particular area, I suppose, that we've done some thinking about and some changes.
Thanks very much, Julie. That's really helpful. Just a question from me. On the form, you said that people are kind of reverting to old practice but using the new form, and you understand that that's a problem. But what are you able to do about it? So I understand this is happening now, so you may not have a worked solution yet. But have you got a plan to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what we're doing when senior managers are auditing cases, and the way we do audit in the Triborough is to have a practice week. So actually, senior managers go out and do observations, meet with workers, and also look at case records. And it's really from that we're picking up on some places, and sometimes it's quite localized, where perhaps there needs to be a little bit more support or education in those areas. So where we're seeing teams that really we feel haven't kind of picked up the kind of the essence or the purpose of writing those case summaries, we're doing a little bit more work with those teams. I think the other thing to say is one of the other interesting experiences we've had is that although we anticipated people feeling like this was inevitably over time going to mean that they needed to spend less time on recording, what it does require people to do is think. And actually what we have found is that initially people are finding it harder to do. And so sometimes it's that kind of getting over it and getting used to something a little bit different. So, what we have done is rolled it out in such a way that actually not every case was necessarily going to be recorded this way as a worker started with this, so that we could kind of help people in negotiating that change of culture.
And Julie, I might just build on, it's Annie here, just build on the point there that you've got views of child and family. If Hertfordshire have not been able to make it today, but something that they might have picked up on as well is how they're focusing in on how you get the views of the child and the family well within the case record, and they are looking at how their system may be able to capture those views, and that the family or a child could input that into their case record and see what their case. So that's just something really interesting about how they're going about that to make sure that view is at sort of very central to the case.
Judy, sorry, just another question from me as well. I know you've talked about the case summary here and how you're using that to get the perspective of the family. I know you're doing lots of other stuff as well. I just wondered whether part of the problem with embedding it, and this may not be true, but part of the problem with embedding new process is that there's lots of other things as well, and that this is just one piece of new process that people are dealing with. Are you finding that's the case, or is it just this bit where you're having a problem?
I mean, certainly we are making a lot of changes all at once. So I think one always needs to recognise that these things happen, and we're asking a lot of workers right now. That we've got more than half our workforce right now doing an accredited systemic training program, which means writing essays and doing presentations, and there is a lot being asked of practitioners right now. I guess what we always anticipated was that they would need a different set of structures around them in order to be able to embed the kinds of changes that we're asking them to make. So though this case summary isn't kind of systemic per se, because I think it's a fairly general sort of layout, the idea was that there would be a time when practitioners felt that what they needed to do was have a forum which was perhaps a bit more focused on the overall story of the family, and allowing them to think that way, because that's the way that we're asking them to to kind of change in practice. I think one of the things that we've not done, I suppose, is to change structures. So workers are still working in the same teams with the same structures with the same managers. So I think some of it is also about when you're asked to do something differently, what's the permission to do something differently, and what's the benefit to you. And I think with lots of the changes that we're seeing, we're seeing that sometimes that that takes time. But it's also one of those things, though, that I think grows. So the more teams come back feeling like that's been something that has been helpful to them, the more that story becomes kind of, you're thickening that kind of alternative story, as they might say, in a kind of a narrative frame, which is understanding that those changes can be of benefit.
And that's actually, you've started to answer a question that David Jackson has just put on the conversation wall, which is many bureaucratic procedures relate to accountability, expectations, and or risk management procedures. And he's asking, how have you helped people to feel secure with the new model? And I think you started to answer that actually, but it's in recognizing that what you're putting forward as a new way of working has an impact. Is that right? So
yeah, I think it was really important right at the outset to give very high. So we had our director of children's services and all the directors of family services go out and meet with teams and say it's okay to record this way, because actually I think one anxiety that people did have was they've kind of grown up in a culture where that idea that you have to write absolutely everything down and that's almost, the implication is almost it's better to do that than to write something that's that's more analytical or more thoughtful or more judgment, making a professional judgment about what needs to be recorded. So I think it was really important for there to be there to be a need for permission, but also for feedback. So one of the things that we're getting now is we're realizing that we've not got it quite right. So people are coming back and saying, yeah, but this isn't really working in practice very well, and then practitioners seeing that we're that we're in kind of collaboration or conversation about this rather than it being a one-way street.
That's really helpful. And actually, as Annie was saying, I'm coaching in Sefton at the moment. They've introduced a community adolescent service, and one of the things they're doing is updating their recording system to reflect their new processes. And I think they are at the moment in user acceptance testing, but they're working really closely with the IT team. I don't know if anyone from Sefton's on the line. If you are, make yourself known. Otherwise, I'll carry on. But I think what's really interesting is that the IT team are very much using an initial model, and if that works, great, but they're fully aware that once it starts to be used in practice, that they're going to have to go back, and people will say, actually, this will be much more useful if this is the question, or if this is the drop-down box, or whatever it is. So it sounds like you're a little bit further ahead in what you're doing. So thanks for that. David Jackson has just come back. Just looking at what he's saying. Thank you. The other piece of this is perhaps audience. Has the primary audience for the new forms changed? Is that the case, or has it stayed the same?
So it hasn't, because this is embedded on our ICS system. So it's what people are using to record on the computer system. So the audience hasn't changed. I think one question early on from people was, what would the reaction of the court be, for example, to this? And what we always felt, and certainly what our experience has been thus far, is that actually what the court wants is recording, which is which supports robust assessment and something that allows for good judgment, and where you get into situations where it's did you visit on this day and so on. Generally speaking, social workers, practitioners, managers know that they need to be recording more often in those circumstances. So the frequency of recording is really up to the manager and the practitioner. So it's not the case that it's set in stone. But I wouldn't say that this has changed the audience. I guess what I would say is that it might help workers think about the audience for which they are writing, because one of the things that we say at the very front of the case summary, which has always been the case but might be a reminder to people, is that actually one audience is a child or a young person who might come back and read their record? And in doing that, would there be a narrative that helped them understand, the decisions and the actions that were taken in relation to them? So though that hasn't changed, hopefully this in some part helps people to think, for whom am I writing?
Okay, thanks very much. I wonder if, Sarah, would you like to come back in? I don't know if you're still there. I think you are and still off mute. But there's something around language here that you mentioned, and that point about a child coming back and reading these summaries. I just wondered whether there's a link there around the language that's used.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a couple of different elements to that. So our perspective on language was around the questions that forms are asking us as well. So when we did our analysis, we found that the language was very corporate, very dry. It didn't feel very child focused, and it was not really using words like goals and achievement and all of these other things that we feel is, sort of frees up. It is a little bit more social worky, I suppose. So when we, and that feeds into making sure that when a child does come back and read their file, that it does actually feel a little bit more aligned with what's going on for them at the time. And I think that it really changes our relationship with the forms that we use, because I think that our forms have been dictating the way that we do things for quite a while. And, social workers have kind of been slaves to their laptops for quite some time now. And we've found that when we've revised our forms, that we can ask some fairly simple questions and get a very nice analytical response to the questions. So one example in particular, because our form's been aligned with the National Social Work Evidence Template, just asking social workers that question, how does this impact on the child? I mean, the first time we asked them that question, we got some pretty flimsy responses, but after some practice, we actually ended up with some really rich examples of analysis and very thoughtful evidence-based work to demonstrate how the child's circumstances are going to impact on them now and in the future.
Okay, thanks. That's really helpful. I think I'd like to move on now to Jane from Morning Lane Associates, because I think there's probably quite a few commonalities between what they're doing there and what the first two presenters have said. So Jane, are you there?
I am.
Great. I'll pass over to you then in that case.
Yeah, well, hi everybody. Yes, there is a lot of commonalities. We're working with 4 different local authorities, and there's a little bit of me that, as I sit and listen, is quite envious of the direct contact you've got with your authorities, because we're doing it slightly long arm, which makes it a bit more difficult to get that whole system buy-in to the project. Our reducing bureaucracy strand is one part of the innovations work that we're doing, and one of the challenges has been to make sure that all 3 strands are linked together. So we've got the strand that's looking at developing consultant social workers, another strand that's looking at setting up preventing family breakdown units, and then the strand that I'm leading on, which is the reducing bureaucracy one. We've kind of working at 3 different areas under the reducing bureaucracy, one of which was very much around recording and the use of forms. We've run into quite a few problems with local authorities there who are very tied to their ICS systems, are very nervous of letting go of the structures, as other people talked about it, which is Kate's practice. And so we are trialling a form, a weekly recording form, that kind of a weekly summary, very much as the other 2 projects are, which kind of encourages workers to think what they've done, why they've done it, rather than process recording, phone calls and visits without really thinking what this means to the child, to the family, and actually doing that. One of the problems is it does actually as I think Julie said, it is hard work initially, and that is quite a struggle. And we're having quite a struggle to persuade local authorities that are participating in our project, that this is a useful thing for them to do. We're doing it small scale projects in 4 local authorities with particular teams or pods or units. They're all kind of trialling the reclaiming social work model in different ways, and we're working with them to try and help them see that this supports working with families in a different way, very much like the other projects. Other bits that we're doing, perhaps moving away from that, because I think we're very much doing the same as the other projects and probably are less advanced in some ways than they are. The other ones, we're looking very much around how data demands have influencing and stopping local authorities being more flexible about the way they're recording. And we're actually doing some work about with local authorities and with the DfE about how we can work together to reduce some of the data demands on local authorities and thus on practitioners, so that actually there is less tick boxy elements to the whole system. So even local authorities who aren't perhaps as far along in their thinking about changes in practice are helped to think less that this has got to be recorded because we've got to tick a box in this particular way and show that this particular activity. And actually, when we've done the analysis about what some of the tick boxes require, it has actually shown us that actually this is now kind of data that's no longer needed to be collected, but local authorities are continuing to collect it because they haven't understood that this is no longer required. So there's something like that. And then we've also done quite a lot of work in the day-to-day frustrations reported by social workers that are actually impacting on the amount of time they have to spend at the computers away from doing direct work. And that's very much looking at the authorising environment, by which we mean how they're allowed to use their own professional judgment over cases and how much time is wasted. And we've done quite a lot with local authorities about actually doing analysis, but how much time is wasted doing because people aren't allowed to make their own professional judgments. They have to go through various systems to get permission to do various things or fill in various forms. And we're helping them to try and streamline that, even with the current systems they've got, and also remove what we call clutter from their systems to try and make just processes, necessary processes, less arduous, so that they can it frees up time. And what we've found out, that just by going in as almost like critical friends to different local authorities and asking some of the questions, we've identified issues that have been felt to be intractable, and everybody acknowledges that, and we're actually saying, well, how can we change this and unblock some of the current problems that they've got in doing that. We're also looking very much, a bit like, as Julie said, I think it was Julie said, or might have been Sarah, about, I think it was Sarah, the administrative support, and actually looking at how that can be, those people, if they're given permission and have suitable skills and are appropriately recruited, can actually make a big difference to a social work team, social work unit, by being given permission to do tasks that have been traditionally seen as social workers, and actually make them more part of the team, giving them permission to perhaps actually interact more with families when they ring in and things like that, and actually trying to work out what is the optimum level of administrative support or business support to social work units, so that they know what tasks they can do and that they're given permission to do that, and social workers see them as supporting them in their work and taking from them some of the tasks that have been identified in our kind of looking at the amount of bureaucracy they have to deal with.
Jane, can I just cut in there? Is that moving authority down to, they're called coordinators, is that how you refer to it?
Yeah, unit coordinator.
Is that, have you found that's a difficult thing to do? I'm just thinking about some of the other projects in the program where their delegated authority is moving. We're trying to move the authority down and turning, changing people's perceptions of what they're allowed to do is seems to be a really good idea on paper, but doing it in practice is actually really difficult.
I think there's been less of a problem at the level of the unit coordinators and the business support people, and it's higher up the organisation that the actual difficulties of the authorising environment. So it's more around team leaders, team managers, unit consultants, social workers, and perhaps the people above them is where we've found the authorising and the nervousness about letting go of, giving permission more difficult. We found actually where the actual people have been recruited as unit coordinators and things like that are very able to do that and feel relatively confident and don't feel inhibited by either the environment in which they're working or that don't feel that they've got the skills. What is more of a problem is that, and it's going back to this thing I was talking about before, which is what is the optimum level of business support unit coordinator to social workers, because unless you've got enough support there, they're not able to do the full range of tasks that could be taken away from social workers.
That's really interesting. Thanks. Carry on. I know I cut in there.
No, not quite sure where I was. Just kind of generally going back to what some of my colleagues said about language. The colleagues in earlier, Julie and Sarah said about language. That is a very interesting thing, and working with local authorities who are still very tied to traditional ICS systems, then the language of social work, they're still very tied to the language of social work, being tasking social workers to do this and things like that, which is so against what we're trying to encourage them to think about. So it's very much a whole system sort of approach, both in language and in the actual changes that we're trying to do in their actual systems, as well as in their kind of general thinking of the processes. There's some very traditional social work activities that that have been identified by the local authorities that we're working with and by the social workers that we feel that we really want to support the local authorities in challenging and thinking about doing differently. Things like arranging transport for families, for children, arranging contact, all of which take an inordinate amount of time, and unless you've got good systems that sit behind that, the social workers spend a disproportionate amount of their time doing it, and it stops them, it takes them away from their direct tasks. So we're actually working with these local authorities to try and help them think differently, and also to think how cost-effective it is to actually challenge some of the ways that have become, and I suppose this goes back to a bit where we're working with local authorities, and we're not part of the local authorities, if you see what I mean. Some of the challenges are kind of cultural in that organisation, and helping the local authorities challenge different parts of their organisation to support social workers in not having to do bureaucratic tasks is one of the challenges that we're finding.
That's really interesting. I wonder whether Julie and Sarah want to come in on this. There's definitely some commonalities. It sounds like everyone has said once you change something or try and introduce a change, it's really hard work initially, and it takes time to embed change. I just wonder whether you've got anything to add in terms of adding data. Something that comes to my mind is that you're talking about, Jane, time away from a PC. I just wondered whether these are remote, these can be accessed remotely or on mobile devices, or if that's something that you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, what we're finding with the local authorities that we're working with one local authority that virtually you can only work, that there's no laptops, you can only work at your desk. It's very, very restricted, and that is part of the culture. It's very nervous about data, that about security, information security and things like that, through to local authorities where the practitioners are telling that actually they do feel enabled to work away and use mobile technology quite well. What they're then complaining about, mobile technology isn't sufficiently advanced to enable them to use it in a good way.
Yeah. Sarah, am I right in thinking that Islington are getting tablets to use for your work with these forms?
Yeah. So we're almost finished rolling out our tablets. The social workers you can almost not separate them from them at the moment. they're everywhere, but they're finding it really helpful. I mean, particularly just sort of making notes after a visit and things like that. I think it frees them up a lot more. Sort of gets them away from their desks. They're definitely liking it. Can I just pick up on something else that everyone was talking about around the weekly summaries, just going back a step or two, because we've taken the decision to introduce we probably are going to move towards weekly summaries, but we're not actually wedded to the idea yet. And if we do it, we're going to do it in stage 2, because we actually found that when we did our consultation, it was the thing that social workers really struggled with most. So that is this very defensive thing that they've got where they want to record everything and they haven't got the trust there yet. And we actually felt that it wasn't something that we necessarily felt we needed to be prescriptive about, and instead decided to focus on producing succinct and analytical child and family assessments, because we felt that if we could actually get them to hone their skills in that respect, and for that to be the focus of the managers, the social workers and the other professional networks, then we felt that in turn that defensive record everything you possibly can mentality would actually start to fade away by itself. Now, I'm not sure whether how that's going to play itself out, because we're only just sort of getting to the stage where we're about to test out our forms live with the workers. But I'm not sure what people think about that idea and whether that's something that could work as well.
Yeah, we haven't got as far as actually testing our forms yet. We're still working with the local authorities to get agreement and to get them in their systems and things like that. And social workers are basically very keen to give them a try and do see them. And I think we're warning them more the other way round, saying it's going to be, it's not necessarily easier to do this. It's going to take some more time. It's certainly going to take more thinking about exactly what you do and why you're writing it, rather than just, you only have to, instead of writing it down every day, you only write it once a week. I think there's a kind of bit of a simplistic attitude until they've actually tried it. So, I kind of hear what you're saying about your staff actually finding it difficult when they actually came to the reality of it.
I suppose from our point of view in the Triborough, I mean, we had kind of a moment of like a good striking moment, which was the beginning of our project, and the fact that actually half the workers were starting on this training. And in a way, I think what we did was, I mean, we did trial it in 3 teams in the 3 authorities beforehand. So there was a much smaller scale kind of rollout initially, and we've not been hugely kind of prescriptive about exactly when all practitioners are going to start using it on all their cases. A lot of it's about negotiating that, introducing it, and then having that negotiation with frontline managers. What I would say, and perhaps I kind of made it sound more negative than I had intended, it is being used across all 3 authorities, and for the most part, it's being used really helpfully. I think but that's sort of almost a year into, it's more than a year ago than that those kind of trials started. So, I think we've probably done it relatively gently, but also kind of strike when the iron's hot, when when people are starting to think about their practice differently. That we felt like, if they could also see some changes around them, then that would, perhaps those things would go well together. But I think it very much depends. I mean, I think you're right. That's the whole point of this is to not be prescriptive.
Mm. And what about measuring progress towards goals? Have you built anything like that into your system?
I mean, do you mean sort of kind of measuring outcomes at different stages?
Well, I mean, because what we've done, because we're working on goal-based interventions, what we've done is in the family goals form, we've actually produced a scale of change. So 10 being lots of changes happen, and 5 being that no, it's just remained the same, and 0 is heading in the other direction where things are deteriorating. We're trying to use that as a way of measuring progress for the family. Completely untested at this stage, but it's looking like it's got potential. I was just wondering if you'd done anything sort of similar around progress.
I mean, I suppose where in the Triborough where we're kind of capturing that is perhaps slightly more qualitatively, and that's I mean, at the bottom of the case summary, there's supervision is obviously still needs to go alongside these, and the idea is that there needs to be a record of what significant progress has been made in this particular period of time towards desired outcomes. So I think much like you, we're thinking much more about not just did I achieve on this particular visit what I needed to achieve, but actually how much am I being invited to step back, both with the family and also with my manager, to think, why are we involved? What is it that we're looking for? And how are we making progress? And how would we know that progress wasn't being made? And then what would we know to do something about that? So it's perhaps a bit more qualitative in our case, but certainly that's one of the ideas that we want. We want people to get out of the minutiae, I suppose, of kind of day to day, and think more broadly about why is it that we're involved with this family in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much, everyone. I'm very conscious of time. It's been really useful hearing you discuss all of the activities you're undertaking at the moment. I'm going to ask Annie to do a bit of summing up and reflection on what you've said. So, Annie, over to you.
I was just going to say a big thank you to Islington Triborough and Morning Lane Associates for sharing those. I think, that's really in the spirit of the innovation programme, to share what you're learning, but also what's being difficult, and what your barriers are. And so thank you for being so open and honest with us. And I just thought there were some really great examples of where systems are being changed to complement practice change. And as Triborough and Julie were saying, a change in practice isn't going to be done by a golden bullet of a form, but if those changes weren't made, even the most enthusiastic workers would be worn down if they weren't supported in their practice. And I think, just what people were saying is people are in different points of their journey, but what we're talking about really is culture change, which is really hard and gradual. And I think these changes that being made to support that are really important, because it shows that we're sort of serious about the change that you're trying to make, and that it's here to stay in the long term. So I think, all those stories that we were hearing is really promising, and sort of part of the ongoing changes that we're seeing.
Great, thank you very much, Annie. And again, thanks very much to Julie, Jane and Sarah, and thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you found it useful. Just as a reminder, if you want to ask any follow-up questions or reflect on anything that's been said, please email to innovation@spring.com. We will be putting this recording up on the Spring website in the coming weeks, and I think all that remains to say is just watch this space, because I think it sounds like these changes are works in progress, and the impact of them will be reported on in the evaluation that will come out later as the programme runs through. So thanks everyone for joining, and enjoy your evenings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, bye.